get some of that.
Happy to help with tech, and I can also send you any of the footage.
Oh, that's great. I'd love that.
Oh, can you flip that Lumix monitor this way? Okay, thanks. So,
Okay.
hi.
Hi, John. And all you viewers out there, my name is Michael Pilarski. I'm with the Global Earth Repair Foundation, and today I'm getting to interview John D. Liu, the founder of the Ecosystem Restoration Camps movement. And so I'm excited to be here today with John. Now, John, you were a keynote speaker at our Global Earth Repair Conference in May 2019. And I was organizing the conference, and we had hardly any time to actually chat. So I'm thrilled that we have had 2 days together to really, sync to talk much more about the Ecosystem Restoration Camps movement and ecosystem repair. So I learned a few things from you here, and I'm going to have you say some things to our audience here. So the Ecosystem Restoration Camps, let's just do a little history. And I believe it was like 2016 when you first, broached the idea. Or is it, what was the history there?
I guess, you have to go back about 3 decades, really, to understand this. So I was asked by the World Bank to film a baseline study of the rehabilitation of China's Lus Plateau, which is in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River. And it's the cradle of Chinese civilization, so this is where the Chinese race emerged. And when I did this, I compared that to the geopolitical events I'd been covering as a producer and cameraman for CBS News, and then Radio Televisione Italiana and Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen. So I did that for 15 years. And I was in the middle of these big geopolitical changes that were taking place in the latter part of the 20th century. And then I saw the ecological destruction and the potential of restoration. And I thought, well, that's way more important than actually any of the other stories that I'd been covering. And they were huge stories, like the rise of China from poverty and isolation and the collapse of the Soviet Union, that level. And when I thought about the importance that I was seeing, I realized, well, actually hundreds of generations of human beings have failed to understand this, and that's why we're degrading the landscape, that the landscape is not valued. So by 2016, I had been working for a long time in this area, so 20 some years, and then I realized that we were going to fail to restore the earth. So it didn't matter if I learned this or understood this, because the institutional development is basically there to maintain the status quo. It's not there to transform human civilization. And so I started having these weird dreams that people were going to go camping and restore the earth. And I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be on some mountainside, and there'd be tents, and people are getting up and going to have breakfast, and then they'd work a few hours and do restoration, and everybody was happy, and it was a very satisfying, fulfilling thing. But I also, when I woke up, I went, what that's impossible. Nobody's going to go camping and fix the earth. And anyway, nobody listens to me. I've got that experience. I've been communicating for years and nobody really catches on. So I thought, that's impossible. But I kept having the dreams. So after these dreams were repeated again and again, I thought, well, I better write something about this, because I'm obviously processing this in the middle of the night subconsciously, or while I'm asleep somehow. And I better write about it. When I wrote about it on the internet, a lot of people wrote back like, I'm having the same dream. So all these people started saying, we're having the same dream. And I thought, okay, that's different. So maybe there's something to this. And then we started to talk about, well, how could we do this? And that ended up creating a foundation. When 1,000 people pledged to give 10 euros per month to make this a reality, then we had to create a foundation. And then when we created the foundation, we started the first camp in Spain, and then the next year the second camp in Mexico. And
what years were that? That was 2000.
2017 we got the foundation going, and then we just started discussing the first camp in Spain. And then in 2018, I think the second camp in Mexico began, and then there was lots of discussion last year. And then by this year there are 23 camps which are registered, and there are another 33 which have applied, and there are another 50 probably behind that would like to get into the system. So what we see is that there's a possibility, there's unlimited amounts of degraded land around the earth, and if we choose to restore the earth, that it's a positive and it's a good thing. But it's transformational because it's not in the existing economy. The existing economy says it's too expensive to restore the earth. But if you're thinking from a humane perspective, you know, it's yeah, that's the only thing that we have to do.
So at the end of 2020, there's the possibility that let's say there's 100 camps.
Well, there'll be probably, it's more like 70 or 80, 75.
Okay. Well, I like the number 100 because it's easy to do multiply. Yeah. So at some point here in the not too distant future, we'll end up with 100 camps. And when we were talking the other day, John, you had this idea that a camp could grow, people would learn, there'd be camaraderie. And at some point, could be strong enough, and there were enough people that it could split into two, and another camp could be formed. And so, when I did the arithmetic, if you had if a camp could split every year, that it would get strong enough that it could spin off another camp. And if you start with 100 camps in 1 year, at the end of that, you'd have 200 camps, and then they split. It'd be 400 camps, and so at the end of the fourth year, you could have 1,600 camps around the world. And that's kind of exponential growth, but we need at least, we need
millions, thousands,
millions. Everywhere in the world almost needs a restoration camp.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I just like this idea, folks, that there is a need for a lot of restoration camps, and John is on the way to sort of getting the ball started, and then it can snowball down, and this needs exponential growth to really pull things together.
Yeah. Well, I would say, there's some things that we see now. We see quite a lot of people who understand that there's degradation, and they would really like to do something, but they don't know exactly what to do. And then you also have a professional class. So you have all these people who say, well, I'm a professional restorationist, or I'm a professional whatever. And that sort of separates the people who don't have those credentials, and they say, well, you can't participate. You have nothing to do, and then they're consumers, and so they're not involved in this. Well, they all have a role to play. The people who are growing a compost pile in their yard, who are growing plants, and they're doing more to mitigate and adapt to climate changes than anybody who's writing pieces of paper and going to meetings all over the world to talk about it, because that's nothing. That's a theoretical thing. We don't have a theoretical problem, we have physical problems. So if you're increasing biodiversity, increasing biomass, and increasing organic material, you are naturally re-regulating the climate. You are protecting and encouraging the return of biodiversity. You are ensuring a sustainable future for your children and future generations.
So John, when we talked the other day, and I was hypothesizing how many people would we need to help fix the world, and how many camps, etc. And you said, well, everybody should be involved, and I love that answer, folks. Is that everybody can have a role to play. And so one of the, in the not too distant future, I'm going to make a little video on how you can contribute to the global ecosystem restoration in your own yard. Ecosystem restoration at the yard scale. And so what we want to have all scales and as many people involved as possible.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's come to me, I sort of realized, so as a journalist covering all those big geopolitical events, there's an aircraft flying. Well, we can still be heard, but there's an aircraft. But covering the geopolitical events always made me confused because there was so much data, and how could you really know about like the Soviet Union or the sort of the political realities in China or the geopolitical events between nations, the kind of foreign relations stuff like spheres of influence, or all of these different concepts that really are quite old
and may get in the way of actually a world movement.
Yeah, well, but anyway, they're confusing. And what I realized when I started to study ecology was it's not confusing. It's not my opinion that the accumulation of organic matter changes the surface temperatures or increases soil moisture. It's just not my opinion. And this is very satisfying to learn something like, well, that's a truth. That's a fundamental truth. And that's not only a fundamental truth, but it comes from evolutionary succession. And so when you really understand it, you're aligned with how the Earth it functions. And you know how the atmosphere was created, constantly filtered and continuously renewed. And that's also true of the freshwater system and the soil fertility. And
the ozone layer.
And all the complexity, all of the symbiotic relationships between living things. So it's not, you can easily get to the edge of mystery. So there is mystery. Yeah, the cosmos, we don't understand everything, but we know enough to know that biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter are the indicators and the determinants of fully functional ecosystems. So if we know that collectively as a society, then it puts in perspective materialism or power politics or racism or discrimination or these other things.
So one of the things we talked about is I was looking at the example of Ethiopia has done a lot in the last decade or 15 years or so. They've had a nationwide regreening and ecosystem restoration, you might say, campaign, and it's sort of led by the government. They pay people in various ways to do it. A lot of people are involved, and you can see Ethiopia greening up from the satellite. So they're really doing a lot of good work. And you mentioned that you're very familiar with that work, that governments running the restoration movement, as it were, that there's downsides to that, and that private, more of the you might say the private sector or a communal movements, or that people doing it out of their own hearts rather than governments paying them is maybe preferable, or
I'm not sure if I would come down. I would definitely say if a government or the governments understand the role of restoration, then they're obligated to value it and to support the people who do it. Mm-hmm. But my conclusion when I started dreaming into the creation of the ecosystem restoration camps movement was that, well, I know the timelines for these giant governmental projects, the costs, the overheads, the complexity, or it's not the complexity, it's the complicatedness of these projects, and they take too long.
And they're also at the whim of whoever's in government.
And they're expensive, they take too long, and so they're the most expensive and the least effective.
So what we're saying, or what I hear you saying, John, is that we don't want to leave this up, the world restoration, up to the governments. It's like we, the people, have to sort of like rise up to the challenge,
Yes.
and maybe hold their feet to the fire so that they actually contribute more, but that we don't want to just leave it up to them.
Well, I think what we're saying is that we need to empower everyone to be able to participate. And we haven't done that. And so the question is, do we need permission? Or can we just decide we have to restore the earth? I mean, we have a duty to our children, to future generations of humanity and other species to actually act. So it isn't really like we need to ask permission, we need to act. So how do we act? How do we act and have the way forward be the least expensive and the most effective, instead of the most expensive and the least effective? So that's when camping emerged. Is like, well, what do we like to do? Well, we like to go camping. We like to garden. So if we go camping and we garden carefully, we study, we listen to the land, we listen to the indigenous people. This place we are here now, this was a huge, massive forest before. So that had reached a kind of ecological climax. It's not static, it's a dynamic equilibrium, but it had reached this amazing state where it was fully functional as possible. Of course, you know, if an asteroid hit or a volcano went off or there was something, it would have to react to that. But now this biome is perhaps 3 to 5% of what it was at its evolutionary climax. Well, that means huge amounts of water are not being absorbed. It's being evaporated off the Pacific Ocean. It's coming inland, but the mechanism for absorbing all that water into the soil and into the biomass and having it respirate is gone, or
greatly reduced.
Greatly reduced. So yeah, this is not the worst. I mean, if you go to the Middle East, whoa, you know, just bare sand and nothing, and you know, the heat hits you like a brick, and you know, you just whoa. But when you understand that through the pollen records, through all sorts of other records, we know exactly what was there.
It was a garden.
It was beautiful, the land of milk and honey. So is that an impossibility now? How we have to say, oh, well, historically that was destroyed, there's nothing we can do. Well, no, that's not true. We're following the people who destroyed these systems and saying, oh, we believe in materialism. Well, the materialism ends up on the junk pile. It's trash. The natural systems continuously filter, you know, constantly filter, continuously renew the natural systems we depend on for life. What is more valuable, junk or the systems that create the atmosphere, the hydrological cycle, and the soil fertility? It's ludicrous. You know, we have to understand this. We're forced to understand this. And I used to want to grab people by the shirt, you know, and say, hey, you have to listen to me, you know, and then like, get off me. Nobody wants to hear me. So then I realized, okay, that is not a strategy. That doesn't work. So what is it that I have agency over? What can I do? And I found, well, the only thing I can do is decide what I do. So then I said, well, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to imagine it's possible to restore all degraded lands on the earth, and I'm going to live my life, the rest of my life, however long I've got, is going to be dedicated to that. And in the doing, I was empowered. And when I realized was all these people are going, "Oh, John, you're doing this. Wow, that's wonderful. That's great." Instead of my telling them they have to do it, I just had to do it. And then when they understand this, then they have the power to, they are empowered to do it as well.
We need so many more people. A lot of you listeners out there, there are so many people that don't have a purpose in life. They don't have a mission. They're just, they may make a living, they may be falling through the cracks, but the Earth restoration movement has room for everybody that wants to join in, and it's a great thing to devote your life to. We need people, we need a lot of people, millions of people to say, I am going to devote my life to this, or at least a big chunk of their life. You can't do it every day in and day out, but yes, and so I've been, like you, John, been on this devoted for many decades now, and we, there's room for everybody to come on board, and you can start doing it at a local level. You don't need permission. You don't need, any rate, there's a lot to talk about. But
that's for sure.
But just to go on another little tangent here, can
you just check and see that thing is still running? It should, if you flip the monitor around, you should see a red dot. You see a red dot? Yep. Thanks.
It's blinking. Is it supposed to be blinking?
Yeah.
So, John, the other day we had a little discussion about refugee camps and how ecosystem camps could interface with the world. Has way too many refugee camps, and they're pretty grim places. And how can ecosystem restoration camps interface with or work with refugee camps? Maybe a few words about that.
Well, yeah, I think that's the potential, but I think we have to prove that ecosystem restoration camps can be efficient and effective. You can't go to these disaster areas and you become like another dependent who's needing help. If we go there as ecosystem restoration camps, we better know exactly what we're doing. We better have the infrastructure we need to train, to live comfortably, because you also don't want to send people into harm's way. So you want to create a very safe situation. So you have to be able to handle the freshwater systems. So you have got to figure out, where's the water coming from? How do we make sure it's absolutely safe, it's not polluted, we're not going to get people sick? And then you need to deal with the food. So you need to feed everybody. So you need to be careful with this. We have a lot of food waste in the world today, even like here, because we haven't figured out yet everything, how to do this. We need to have a system where you have people in charge of the food and everybody's fed and nobody's hungry. There is no hunger in our communities. Everyone is fed and everyone has a place to stay and everybody has work to do. And then the question is, like, if we can do that, if we can learn to build the infrastructure, we can learn to live harmoniously together in these camps, and we can train everybody in restoration techniques. So how to infiltrate and retain moisture, how to grow organic soils, how to grow vegetation from many different levels, as you very well know, from grasses to forbs to trees, and it's every level, multi-dimensional, multi-level systems, and train people how to do that. If we're able to do that and deliver, for instance, in containers, the camp infrastructure, and like 2 days a week it's up and the fully functional camp is there. It's got raised bed agriculture to feed people immediately, plant things for greens, carry in seedlings and plant them out, and immediately you're going to get food rapidly you're going to get food. And then training. So you have a core group of people who are the trainers, and then you have, I would say, the ideal for refugee camps would be to ring the giant refugee camps. There are refugee camps with 500,000 people in them. You know, I don't think we can go inside of those camps and take care of the situation. We have to like ring them with ecosystem restoration camps, and then take 10 or 15 people to each one of the camps and start training them. How long is that training? Weeks or something? And then when they know what they're doing, they leave and some more people come. And so they're implementing this throughout the camp, everywhere, through the refugee camps. And when we do that, first of all, it takes all these people who are now like confused and like, I can't be at home, and it gives them a purpose so they can help themselves. They can feed themselves, they can make the camp better, they can make the sanitation better, they can make the vegetation better. When they leave the place, it can be better than when they went into this camp, rather than be this scorched earth place that's been destroyed by having 500,000 people live there. And so not only that, but let's hope that the whatever wars or catastrophes that have forced them to leave their homes are over, and they can go home. And when they go home, they take the skills necessary to restore their homes. So this is not just a short-term Band-Aid fix. This is like, let's fix the situation. Let's give them a chance. And many of these people have lost their human rights. Mm-hmm. So how can they get their human rights back? Well, this is also how they get this is how they stand up and get their human rights back. We and the rest of the people on the whole earth, we have to say, you have equal rights. We can't say, oh, it's okay for you to live in a refugee camp and, you know, be miserable.
Right, for the rest, for generations or anything.
It's horrible.
You gotta, go back.
Yeah, so...
Or at least to a new, or at any rate.
So on the one hand...
They become part of the restoration movement in a way.
Yes.
It's a big training camp.
Yes, but I have to tell you, we have to be good in order to do that. So some people hear about ecosystem restoration and go, oh, it's easy to do restoration. No, it's not. It's not easy. It's difficult. Hundreds of generations of human beings would not have failed to understand this if it were easy. It's difficult. But because it's difficult, it's kind of worth doing. It's like a worthy task. If it's too easy, it doesn't make any sense. And I think you can spend your whole life every day doing this, but you have to get into a different perspective. And when you do, you realize this is life. And this is a better way of life than entertaining ourselves or consuming things or doing what is expected of us from some sort of giant corrupt machine that really prefers to control us, and we're not free. So I think let's be free, let's restore the earth. That's what we need to do. And the more people who do that, the better the earth's going to be, the better their individual lives are going to be, and the more fun we're going to have as a community. Festivals and singing and, just being able to sit at the campfire with all of you guys is pretty good, so.
Yeah, life is, so just to tell people where we're at here, we're at one of the ecosystem restoration camps at the very beginning of Camp Hotlum on the slopes of Mount Shasta in Northern California. A lot of the ecosystem has been degraded by over logging, clear-cut logging, and they changed the nature of the place. And so this camp is just one, it's one of the forerunners, so that we can, to get good, we're going to have to practice. It's going to take some time, but we're on the move. And so, John, that's great that you are opening up this opportunity for people. So, if people out there are interested in, volunteering at a restoration camp for whatever length of time, or really joining the movement, where would they start, John? What's their website, or where would they go to?
Well, ecosystemrestorationcamps.org is set up now, and each of the individual camps, I think there are 23 now that are registered, and if they've gone through the whole process, then they already have their own websites or their own connections pages on the movement's website, or connections from that to their sites. And so you could go to now Guatemala or Egypt or India or west coast of the United States. I think they're working in Appalachia and Mexico and South Africa, and there's Kenya. There are many places around the world, and then there are more that are forming. So generally speaking, the local people are going to have to carry the ball. These camps are self-organizing, self-governing, and they are autonomous, but they are linked together, and that means that all the knowledge that we can gather together can be shared with knowledge exchange, that we can have courses and training in all different biomes, tropical, alpine, grasslands, forests, agricultural, regenerative agricultural practices, permaculture. And so that's what's happening in these different places. And it is a great way to spend your time, because you're busy and you're having fun, and it's it's necessary, and it does this interesting thing that happened to me after I left journalism. My mind went quiet. It became very satisfying to realize, oh, there's truth. It's not just relativism that's out there. There's truth. The earth spins and wobbles and circles the sun, and the whole solar system moves through space, and the organic material, as each generation of life dies and gives up its body, it nurtures the next generations of life. And those kinds of realizations can come to you when you are grounded and quiet and listening to the earth.
Mm-hmm. And
you can also hear gunfire occasionally.
Well, one of the, so you mentioned some of the benefits of joining the movement, but I'd just like to point out to people that you really become part of a community, and we are community-minded social creatures. And so after all this big round of social isolation in the world because of COVID, it's become really even more clear to a lot of people that they need a community, a place to belong, people that they like being with. And so this is a way to join a community that has a real joy of life and has a real purpose in life, and so I recommend that. And one last thing I would point out to people is that the Ecosystem Restoration Camps has just started putting on their first online course in restoration. So it's a great prep way to sort of get yourself more educated to go to camps or start your own. You don't just have to go to somewhere else that's already started. You can start a camp where you are. So you can find out about the course at their website, and that's fall, this current one, their first one, and the next one will start in January 2021. So
well, maybe it can be bigger. They'll learn a lot in this first course, and maybe it can be double or triple the size, or there can be multiple cohorts or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if a lot of the stuff is recorded, then it can just run continuously and be made available all over the world. So I think that's
right. And eventually, of course, it'll be in other languages as well. As right now, it's starting out in English, but it's a big world out there, and every camps will have to be different culturally in different countries. It's not they're all, they're not like a cookie cutter thing that's stamped out. They're all individual, like you say, they're autonomous.
And I would also just mention that I think that, the governments can definitely be involved. It's just that the people are making their voices heard. They're deciding that, this movement is about the people deciding, okay, we got to restore the earth. There's nothing else that's more important right now. And so that gives us power to decide what we do. And in doing that, we have to take care of everyone. We have to say everyone in the camp is fed, everyone is cared for, everyone is equal. And if we do that, we're answering many of these historical problems that have been growing and getting worse and worse. And if we do that, then the next generations, they don't have to deal with those problems. They'll have new problems, but they won't have these old problems because we will have addressed them. And if we don't address them, we can look at the Black Lives Matter now, or the indigenous people, or the refugee situation around the world. All of these problems, we really need to deal with them. And it's not just like, how do you infiltrate water and how do you grow up the vegetation and the biodiversity that we have to deal with. We have to say, oh, in the doing of this, in the doing of infiltrating water and restoring the vegetation and the biodiversity and the soils and the atmosphere and the hydrological cycle and climate regulation, we also get the chance to change the way we live with one another and the changed ourselves.
And part of the healing of the earth is part of healing of humanity. And when you go out there and work with the land and you're out in nature, it's much more likely that you're going to have a good mental equilibrium. And right now there's a lot of people that are, they might say there's a lot of damaged earth, but there's a lot of damaged people out there. And the act of doing this kind of work is helping heal ourselves too.
Well, there are people in the United States, for instance, who are homeless. And they're wandering around in the streets and begging for somebody to hand them something to eat or something. Well, they have equal rights. They deserve respect and to participate, but they don't maybe expect to become the CEO of a major corporation and take home hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So are we saying that, oh, they didn't make hundreds of millions of dollars, they're not as good as the CEO? We have to say, no, they're equal to anybody. They're human beings, they live on the earth. Their DNA is connected to all life since the beginning of time. It can't be any other way. And so if they're alive, they deserve equal rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all living beings are endowed with certain inalienable rights. Mm-hmm. So this is a chance to live the change that we want to see on the earth. And what else have we got to do, really?
Yeah, it's fun. So thank you, John, for this interview. I hope a lot of people are going to watch this over time, where I'm thrilled to, our Global Earth Repair Foundation members get a chance to hear you speak in this way. And so there's a lot to do, folks. This is the wave of the future. John, thank you for helping start this movement. Yeah, go for it. Let's go for it, folks. And blessings to everybody.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. That was great, John.
Nice.